come back that afternoon to do the fabric. And Jen says, but we don't have the mulch, there's no point. They'll just blow loose. And all right, so today we got the mulch.
Time for it to blow away this winter.
Oh no, that stuff locks down pretty good.
I should get the same kind of mulch you get because mine seems to blow away.
If it gets pretty light when it's dry, we water it down, get it out there.
That's just not gonna be here. Okay, is this the set?
Yeah, we'll give it another minute or two.
1, 3, 1, 5.
That's what it is. 105, 106.
It's kind of like Sunday school. Some mornings we're packed and other days we're not. So
You
sound
never know.
good. Never know. Now we got a little more free space.
Yeah.
A little bit. I decided to only occupy right in front of the pulpit because nobody wants to sit there anyway. So,
Right.
in fact, you're the bravest soul of the group. You're always in the front row.
Yeah.
Sometimes I spit, so
Well,
be careful.
yeah.
You don't want to be within swinging distance of a preacher.
I don't get too animated, but you know, a little bit. Maybe I'm more than I think. I don't know. You don't notice your own stuff, you know.
It depends on the subject.
Yeah.
You get going sometimes.
Yeah. Yeah. Certain hobby horses are hard not to ride. Yeah. Yeah. I really hate gambling, so if you get me started on that, I'll go on that. Calvinism, not a fan of that. Faith only, that's another one. There's a handful. Apple products. Yeah.
Because you don't know how to work on them or
Well, there's a long story. It goes all the way back to the 80s when my parents were in business and I worked for them. And Apple was never cooperative, ever. If you couldn't produce $10 million a year for them, you were.
Well, you know, I can remember when, of course, Bill Gates ripped off all the stuff.
Oh yeah, I don't deny that.
But slowly but surely, they all showed up on the Microsoft machines.
Right. Yeah. Oh, I don't deny that.
And none of them can cooperate, just as from a user's perspective.
Right.
They didn't cooperate with each other. So for a long time, you didn't have a common use of the keyboard.
Yeah.
That was horrible.
Yeah.
Did I ever tell you how I got introduced to computers? I worked at Aetna and they drop shipped the first PCs. Remember the Charlie Chaplin commercial? No, you don't. You were just born.
I've seen it.
Yeah, but it was like the message was any idiot could do it. They drop shipped the computer and then they shipped separately the BASIC and the DOS manuals, which were written by people who spoke Japanese as their first language.
Right.
And if you didn't know what it said, you couldn't figure it out.
Right.
And I had a manager who was telling me I should be able to pull that out of the box and start programming.
Yeah.
When I knew that people majored in college, carrying around all those cards with chads, hanging chads up.
Yep.
And
I remember
those.
those. We didn't use them. I was too young for that, but I remember them.
I can remember one girl actually dropped her box of cards.
Oh
And,
gosh.
oh man, what a meltdown.
Oh gosh. Yeah.
You would never they said.
Computers were an absolute.
Oh yeah. Well, that's why my parents were so successful, because if you understood it, you were wizards.
Yeah.
Mhm.
You know.
Yeah.
Down in the state of Missouri, they had massive retirement.
Yeah. And see, from a business.
Close, they retired.
Yeah. And from a business perspective, which my parents were in and I was in, you saw a Mac 1 out of 100
Crap.
junk.
Junk, and I couldn't, it would pop up like whack-a-mole.
Yep.
You don't get that was an apple.
No, you don't, but I'm not,
Or
that
Mac,
was
yeah.
it. And what triggered me saying that was, I couldn't find help anywhere.
Yeah.
Desert island by myself. Heck with this, I'm gonna
I
sell it
understand.
and get something else.
I'm not actually saying there isn't a use for an Apple product. I just enjoy hating them. So that's
I can
it.
tell.
There's just I'm not racist except for Apple products. Yeah. Between that and peanut butter, I don't
Well,
know.
they're kind of snobby, you know?
They are
Even
that.
if you have a,
Yeah.
you know, in Denver, I had a mall where they had a Genius bar, but I don't think there's any place.
I
in
talked to one the
Columbia.
other day, and she was the nicest person. She said, "Don't ever feel stupid for asking a question.
Oh, if you call them, they're very
They're
helpful.
wonderful."
But I mean, there's no place to take your machine into.
You can find an Apple store.
So, yeah, I think you have in
St.
Kansas
Louis,
City or St.
probably,
Louis.
because the
yeah.
one closed in Columbia. I
don't
thought there was one, wasn't
I
there?
think there used to be, but
All
I
right.
think they moved there, they closed down.
As much as I would enjoy continuing to rip on Apple, we've been live streaming for 5 minutes. So the beginning of the Revelation 6, 7, and 8 live stream is going to be why Josh doesn't like Apple. So, oh well, moving on. We are in Revelation chapter 6, verses 7 and 8. We'll go ahead and get started. Everybody should have the up-to-date sheet. If somebody else walks in, we'll get them one. I've got some good news for you. You ready for this?
Yeah.
The fourth rider is the easiest to interpret.
Oh, good.
Yeah, isn't that nice? Yeah. I actually kind of think the four horsemen go in order from most difficult to least difficult to understand. And now we're at the easiest one. It's so easy, it tells what it is. So that's not common in the book of Revelation. So let's enjoy the easiness of it. I say it's easy, but it's not a pleasant horseman. So as we read 7 and 8, there is a somber tone to it. So if somebody would read Revelation chapter 6, verse 7 and 8, that'd be great.
When the Lamb broke the fourth seal, I heard the voice of the fourth living creature say, "Come." I looked and behold, an ashen horse, and he who sat on it had the name Death, and Hades was following with him. Authority was given to them over a fourth of the earth to kill with sword and with famine and with pestilence and with the wild beast of the earth.
Okay, thank you, Jim. So easy to understand, but not pleasant to understand. Certainly a somber had to talk about. If you look at the top of your notes, page 103, I know it's hard to believe we have 103 pages. The binders are actually starting to get a little heavy. So, right there in verse 8, we are told who this horseman is. He is Death, and Hades was following right behind him. So if you put the second, third, and fourth horsemen together, we have war, we have bad human wisdom resulting in bad economics. Combine war and conflict with human idiocy, what do you get? Death. Yeah. This is the natural consequence of man's sin fully grown. You'll know there's a verse in James chapter 1 that says when sin is fully grown, it gives birth to death. And that's true on an individual level all the way to the worldwide level. So that's what we're talking about here today. Sadly, beyond these things, until the end of time, there will be war, there will be conflict, there will be idiocy, and people will die and suffer because of it. And there is not a human solution to these problems. There is only a God. Another way to think about it is when individuals start living for the Lord, the idiocy starts to fade. Certain things in their life will start to improve. Now, other things in their life might get harder. If you become a Christian and the rest of your family isn't, that part of your life is going to get harder. But you're going to start getting wiser when it comes to your own actions, your own words, and certain things in your life will improve. I think one thing I've ran into a lot, and in my own life is true too, the more I dive into the Bible about money, the wiser I get about money. And the smarter decisions I make. Even this past year, I ran into some truth where I was like, yeah, I need to do that. And inherently, I don't know, I don't think it's genetic, but just inherently personality-wise, I'm not a saver. Like that's a discipline for me. Some people are born natural savers, okay? Other people are born natural spenders. I tend to be on that end of things. I don't tend to sweat the bullets in a lot of areas. I just tend to like focus on the mission and was not focused on that. So I don't really care about money that much. But the problem is with that mentality, things can get away from you, right? Yeah. Now, thankfully, I've never put myself or my family in any kind of real danger. But there are times where I've looked back at the end of the month and I'm like, I could have done better. Didn't need to do that. And so I continually, now what's funny is I married a woman who was also not a saver. So neither of us are natural savers. So it's a spiritual discipline. Whatever you're not good at is a spiritual discipline. All of us have things we're not good at. We have to discipline ourselves to improve upon them, whatever that is. I think for some people, it's learning to be sensitive to other people. Some of us are just born blunt. Okay? She just, straight to the point. She hates it when people ask how she's doing because she doesn't believe they care. She just wants to know, what did they need? That's it. Like her and Alex, previous youth minister, they had a great relationship because neither of them liked small talk. They could get to the heart of an issue in 15 seconds. And they both loved that, But Kara's had to learn, and she's gotten a lot better with it, that over time, that other people need a more cut around the bush kind of relationship. Some people really need that small talk. And that's how they feel loved. It's hard for people who aren't that way to understand that. But that's something I understand in my role.
It's very hard to understand.
Yeah. But some people just need that. They need your presence. They don't want to talk about anything deep. They'll talk about the weather. They'll talk about news. They'll talk about anything. They just want to talk. I have one child in particular that talks to talk. That's it. Okay? It doesn't matter what it is. Well, maybe I should say two children are like that. Even Jonathan, to some degree, struggles with that. He's not a small talker, but he's learned in our position that you have to be sensitive to people. Some people are just not that way, and so whatever your struggle is, that's your spiritual discipline. It's what you constantly got to work on, and so the reason why I bring this up is because we as a human race are not evolving. That's a myth. It's a lie. And because we're not evolving, if we're not disciplining ourselves, if we're not growing, both as individuals, as families, as well as communities and churches, and even as a nation, then we are inevitably actually going to devolve into the mistakes of the past. It's inevitable. I know I'm speaking to the choir here. But if we want to avoid having the fourth horseman visit our lives and our house, we got to discipline ourselves as much as possible to avoid those consequences. Because the world is marching ever so much faster into its own destruction. I have a theory. It's a little bit of a controversial theory. I don't think for this group it is, but I've talked about this with some people. When Jesus says that people were eating and drinking and being given in marriage until the day the floods came? Okay? So everything seemed fine. Everything was just going as they always had. People are just doing whatever they're doing until what? The day the floods came. It's not like it started trickling a week early. Okay? It just happened. And when it happened, it was sudden, and there was nothing you could do about it. If you weren't prepared by then, you were done. My theory is someday, I don't know when it's going to be, probably sooner than later, sadly, I think we're going to get, who is ever president, it won't matter, they're going to get on TV and they're going to say, well, folks, we're broke, sorry, good luck. Everything will be fine the day before. And then the day the floods came. So,
The way they're shooting rockets nowadays, it may be a rocket.
could be.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, don't know.
It's going to be sudden.
It's going to be sudden. And that's what Jesus says, right? When he returns, it's going to be like that. Yeah, no warning. Nobody knows. It's just going to happen.
In fact, my theory is that everybody's going to be thinking, hey, it's great. Things are really going good.
A lot of people will be.
That's what I mean. A lot of people are going to be.
Yeah, it's a false.
Christians should know.
Yeah. So it's a reality of living on this earth that we must deal forthrightly as Christians with these things at anywhere, at any time. Christians should be the least surprised people on earth. And yet, I still find myself surprised sometimes. I'll give you another little illustration here. I'm not a TV watcher, never have been, didn't grow up with it, so I struggle to watch. My wife likes to watch shows to some degree. But I really do not like crime shows. Okay, that's her favorite genre, prison crime shows. She used to be in that world. I can't imagine living it and then watching it for fun. But she could. I can't do that. I don't like it because I do the jail ministry and I do court and things like that. And my world, my life is serious as it is. I don't want to watch that for fun. That just does not appeal to me. I want to watch I want to watch movies or shows where things blow up for 2 hours, like just action, just whatever, just random explosions. Or I want to watch something stupid funny, just comedy, clean comedy. That's it. It's about the only two things I want to watch. Well, we tried to compromise the other night because she wanted to watch something I didn't want to, but it's okay. And she'll watch almost anything, really, though. She's very flexible. So we tried one of the new Star Trek series. Don't do that. About 10 minutes in, somebody was gouging out somebody else's eyeball. And I was like, I don't want to watch this. This isn't the Star Trek I remember. The old, philosophical and, laser beams, that kind of stuff. I don't know what this was, but nothing I want to watch. Okay? Now, again, the reason why I bring this up is because when we're trying to live like Christians in today's world, it's pretty rare that we're going to be rightly entertained by the world. This is kind of a sad truth. I'm grateful that there is some decent entertainment out there from certain sources, but it's few and far between. But the good news is my life's not about entertainment. That's fine. It doesn't have to be. But here we are, living in the world that's running hardcore into death, the fourth horseman, and we're trying to do our best to be faithful people in that universe. So in verse 7, Jesus the Lamb breaks the fourth of the 7 seals. Remember, the 7 seals is the perfect unfolding plan of God, signaling one of the living creatures to say, come, and beckons the fourth horseman's arrival. Now, it seems strange at first glance, I think, that God would invite any of the last 3 horsemen. Okay, isn't that strange? That Jesus broke the seal, and then what comes is war, what comes is human idiocy, what comes is death. But it's not an invitation. Instead, it's a reality that sin has consequence. Not even God can avoid that. Keep in mind that God could not just wish away sin. He had to send his son to pay for it. That's a very important thing to understand. That omnipotence does not include the ability to simply wish away sin. Omnipotence was the means to do it that nobody else had. So it's not a matter of invitation, it's a matter of reality when sin has saturated the world. Instead, God is working to redeem the world, and he did that through Jesus Christ, and he will finish the job at the end of time. And what I mean by finish the job is he will eradicate sin and evil once and for all. So the language here is meant to tell us that even with all the evil, sin that has been introduced into the world, God is still in control. That even the evil of the world is checked by him. I heard a preacher one time say that Satan is on a leash. I think that's accurate. Yeah, he's on a leash. He doesn't have limitless ability. Remember, he had God permission to pick on Job. So he couldn't just go do it. So he's on a leash. Let's talk about the horse. Not the horsemen yet, just the horse. An ashen horse. Now, that's not a word that I think any of us use every day. I had to kind of look into that. Now, I knew it meant something pale or yellow, but digging in a little deeper was interesting. It's not just pale or yellow, because I'm pale, okay? It's a sickly kind of pale. Okay? For example, you probably all remember at Sunday school that morning I got ill. I remember Barb came down here to check on me, and she said, oh my gosh. She said, you are so pale. And I'm already pale, but when you're even paler, people can tell something's wrong for. So my conclusion is that since there's nothing in Zechariah about a horse like this, it probably doesn't, it's not going to tell us anything about this horse in Revelation. But nonetheless, just a little bit of biblical trivia. You all ready for this? In Zechariah, there's a horse called a sorrel horse. Now, just like ashen.
It's sorrel.
Sorrel. Oh, you know it.
Sorrel.
Sorrel. I have never heard this word. Other than Bible. Never heard this word. Okay, well, you all can teach me then. Because when I looked it up, different translations. In the KJV, it said speckled, which also doesn't tell me much. The New King James Version also uses sorrel. And when I looked it up in the dictionary, it's copper red.
That's what it is.
Okay.
Brown reddish.
All right.
But speckled, I don't want to call it speckled, but
Yeah.
it could be. But I don't know what they're-
So I tried to look up things that were like pictures of things that were sorrel, or I'm now saying that right. I was saying sorrel all day. Sorrel, and like it varied wildly. So I couldn't pick up anything there. And then the NIV and the NLT, which tend to be watered down translations, lower reading level, they just said brown.
Well, your copper red is pretty accurate.
Copper red's pretty accurate.
It's a yellowish red.
Okay, well I'm gonna.
Tints of yellow to it, but it's more red.
Well,
But it's hard to have, like a Roman.
Darker, yeah.
It's
I would
easy
say
to get.
a light ox blood, you know, something
So
like that.
tell me what would you describe as sorrel that you ran into?
Mare, horse.
Oh, okay, so a horse. All
And
right.
sorrel mare.
Okay.
That's the only place I've run into.
All right.
Mhm.
I had never heard the word other than in the
I
Bible.
had 4 kids in there, all their horses there. There was always an argument about what a sorrel was, you know. It's a reddish color with a little bit of a copperish shine to it. I don't know how to describe the tint. Jim probably hit it on the head. It's a reddish. It's not just a brown horse.
Okay, well then, just for fun, because I like to do this, because I'm learning about these things, because people ask me about these things, I asked AI, what is sorrel? And it just gave me all the options. It didn't like define anything.
Did you say sorrel?
Well, I didn't say it. I did.
Oh, okay.
See, we don't talk to our things.
Oh,
Now, I've only heard sorrel used in the context of a horse.
Yeah, that's the only way I would do it.
Yeah.
Is that a color that could?
I don't know.
I've only
But
heard
the
of
color
horse.
itself is a reddish brown.
Yeah,
Okay.
It's not a brown horse.
it's kind of rich
All
color.
And it's got more, it's a brighter, it's not a bright red, but it's got this copperish kind of look to it.
Yeah.
That's all I can describe it.
And then something else that was fascinating was I have this tool in my Bible study software that lets me look up that word in other works of ancient. Nothing.
I bet you if you tell it to show you a picture of a sorrel horse, then you'll see the color.
Okay. All right. I should do that. So there you go. I knew nothing about this. Tried my best. You all knew more than I did. So there you go. Yep. But anyway, just a little bit of trivia because when I looked it up, I didn't have any idea what that meant. So, but we're just going to assume that since we don't have that here in Revelation chapter 6, we're just going to move on from Zechariah for this particular horse. Now, it's most likely that the ashen, sickly pale, yellow horse is self-descriptive here, so something that is unhealthy or dying. We know from modern medical science that yellowing of the eyes, skin is a sign of jaundice. I think all of us know that. Jaundice is, of course, a result of one of 4 kinds of malfunction of the liver. I dove into this a little bit too much. Found myself needing to get out of that rabbit hole. But basically, there's 4 different kinds. Some happen before the liver, some happen after. 2 of them happen in the liver, whatever. Left untreated, it can be deadly. We all know that. It's universally understood that jaundice should always be considered and treated. You should figure out what's going on. It's not a good idea to ignore that symptom. Now, here's what's really fascinating. The ancients had a grasp on this. They actually understood it. I was really surprised by this. You can go all the way back to 25 BC, and there's a Greek physician named, I can't really say it well, Aulus Cornelius Celsus, and he was the first one to record that jaundice was a liver problem. Yeah, he did all these extensive studies with the tools and information he had because he was a royal physician. He was a physician of the emperor. And he noticed that the royal court and other wealthy people had this problem way more than the population did. Well, can you guess why?
Drinking.
drinky.
Drinking. Yeah. The rich people could afford to drink alcohol. The poor people couldn't. So it was a problem. He called it a failure of the royal organ. Now, he had a really hard time treating this with his royal subjects, and I'll tell you why. If you look at the bottom of your sheet, it's number 19 there at the bottom of page 104. These, among other health problems, were often called diseases of the rich, as usually only the rich had enough to eat at that time to have access to luxuries like sugarcane, to create alcohol, to waste it like that. Nowadays, due to our comparatively great wealth, the once diseases of the rich inflict much more of the population. I had a realization, everybody's rich.
Yeah.
We're all rich. We might vary in terms of how wealthy we are, but the poorest person in America is doing better than the average person in the Philippines by a good mile. Yeah, boy, is it. So he had another problem. The people that he was treating, the royal court and the rich people at the time, he couldn't get most of them to stop drinking. And it wasn't, I mean, addiction was part of it. He didn't really understand that. But he said they were convinced that either the gods they worshipped or God, because some theists, would ultimately rescue them. That they had a license to abuse their bodies. So he was very frustrated in his journals trying to treat this problem because he noticed the handful that would quit drinking got better. Imagine that. So he was the first to kind of conduct a little science in his time and try to tell the royal court, you got to quit drinking. This is not good, you know. And he even came up with a very watered down wine. He tried to create flavors of wine that were very low alcohol to weed people off or to give them an alternative, and none of them would do it because they wanted to be buzzed. So, an admirable man for who he was at the time. Lived to be 75 years old. And even tried to, I think his purpose in trying to label it the failure of the royal organ was to cast a little shame on them, make them think twice about what they were doing. But unfortunately, he didn't get very far. So he would try to encourage them to take rest from drinking, and the body would often heal itself, but, you know, people don't like to listen. So top of page 105. So even the average reader of Revelation at the time would have understood that this horse represents the immoral or sinful behaviors of mankind meeting their ultimate consequence, which is death. You know, you can die of jaundice if you don't treat it long enough. You can die of liver failure. But also, there was STDs back then. And the royal court and the wealthy and even the rich general populace would sleep around. And what we understand now to be chlamydia, they understood to be, if you sleep around, if you do these things, the gods are going to inflict you with judgment and you're going to die. And they didn't have the medicine, of course, to fix chlamydia, so it was often fatal. And again, the people who were of higher status believed that they would ultimately be rescued, so they didn't stop. So what a mess. And it's still a mess today. It's almost kind of unfortunate that we have medications to heal our sinful behavior, but we often do now. Well, anyway.
And the medication they're trying to give us on fixing all that sleeping around is, you know, as far as abortions is, let's just kill the evidence.
Right, yep, that's another one. Yeah. Under the guise of health care.
Yep.
Yeah. Good times. Well, anyway. So let's talk about the fact that he's named Death and Hades was following him. That's an interesting thought. So we don't just have a horseman here. We have a horseman with somebody else right behind him. So it's unique because none of the other horsemen have this.
You mean like the whole troop from Hades?
Well, that's a good question. It's a plural word. So yeah, but again, we're talking symbolically here.
Oh.
So I'll explain here in a minute before I go into that. The rest of the verse, because if you look at verse 8 again, authority was given them over a fourth of the earth to kill with sword and with famine, with pestilence, and by the wild beasts of the earth. So they were given authority to do this. That sounds just like Satan and Job. Because Satan sought the authority to do that to Job, and that's precisely what he did. And so this is judgment. When sin finally saturates, when sin is fully grown, it gives birth to death. And so this fourth horseman unleashed is judgment. And that's their job. And therefore, it's important to realize that judgment is both now and at the end of time, because we already suffer the consequences of our sin to some degree here, but the ultimate consequence is not death in terms of the first death, but rather the second death. And we all understand that. So, with this authority, they did these things. And notice, they went to a fourth of the earth, 1. 2, they killed with sword, war. They killed with famine. That happens normally through idiocy and bad economics. It can happen through natural causes, but for the sake of argument here, we're going to say it's from the third horseman. And then pestilence and wild beast of the earth. So a lot of judgment here. And I think one of the reasons why there's so much variety in terms of judgment is that nobody's going to escape. Okay? Maybe you live in a part of the world where there's not a lot of war. You know, the United States has enjoyed the fact that we've had very little conflict on our own soil. But if we were Israel and like every other week rockets were being launched over our heads, I think we'd feel a little differently about our neighbors. You know, we don't tend to fear Canada and Mexico, at least on a daily basis. Okay? Maybe on policy and the border and all that, but we don't tend to have to worry about a rocket flying into our house. But if you escape the sword, who says you'll escape famine? If you escape famine, who says you'll escape pestilence? COVID's a great example of that. Nobody got to escape that. It's a virus. It's going to go. It's going to go around. It's inevitable. And the wild beasts of the earth, everywhere you go, there's some critter out there that wants to sting you or eat you. You know, nature is not as much as it's beautiful and amazing, I wouldn't exactly.
Well, we had a lot of them paid until these environmentalists, the way you want to call them, was trying to put new bears back in here,
Yeah.
wolves and all
Yeah.
different stuff to eat everything. But
Yeah. There's so many stories. That's another example of human idiocy, trying to mess with nature. Invasive species. There was a story, I can't remember, I wish I would have looked it up now. But there was a story where, like, there was this island and they had a prairie dog problem. Yeah, and they, like, tried to introduce some kind of snake or something that wasn't harmful to humans. But then, like, they killed all the prairie dogs, which let some other kind of pest, like, run rampant. And then you have this overpopulation of useless snakes. And you were almost better off just living with the prairie dogs. Probably were better off just leaving it alone. Or just hunting the prairie dogs. You know, imagine that.
They bring you body claim if left unchecked.
Yeah, okay, there you go. Yeah, there's and here's the truth too. Sometimes there's no way to win. You know, the cure is sometimes worse than the problem. That's just a mature way of looking at the world. In fact, tonight, a deeper study for youth, I'm going to talk about that to some degree. You know, we think we know how to fix the country, but we don't even know how to clean our room. You know what I mean? We can really think too much of our abilities here. Like, I'm going to vote for this person because I know that this policy would be best, and this person can't change oil in their car. You know what I mean? Like, there's a disconnect between how smart we really are. And I think that has a lot to do with the third horseman. Well, anyway, the ancients, including in the Bible, often describe the earth in quadrants, so fours. One example is earth, water, air, and fire. It's one of the oldest understandings of the earth. Northeast, south, and west, that goes back thousands of years. Even in the Bible, Revelation 7:1, 4 corners of the earth, also in that same verse, 4 winds of the earth. So when we're talking about they were given authority over a quarter of the earth to do these things, the idea is that a significant portion of the earth would always be enduring some kind of self-inflicted judgment. I mean, there's never been a time in human history where you can say the whole world was at peace. It's never happened. Never will happen, I'm sad to say. Wish it would. I'm an optimist. I'd love to see it. But I also know from the Bible that we might have short periods of time in the Middle East where not a lot's going on, but it's just a matter of time. And that's going to be true until the end of time. There's no getting around that. No matter what accord or what strike or what, in the end, it's going to melt down again. Because the Bible says so. That's it. There's nothing else to it. And even if you don't want to say the Bible, history tells us that. we have to pretend like we're better than our ancestors to believe otherwise. And I think that's hubris. All right. Let's flip to the next page there. Page 106. We might end a little early. Hope you don't mind. So pestilence. Now this is specifically referring to diseases of immoral behavior. So STDs, drunkenness, that kind of problem. But also just God's judgment directly. Some would even argue that certain natural disasters are God's way of getting some people's attention.
I thought it was like locusts and grasshoppers.
Yeah, that too. Yeah, just anything that's devastating that, you know, maybe an individual could not have caused, but a nation of people did contribute to. You know, I don't think that because I lied that God sent the hurricane that just devastated North Carolina and Tennessee, okay? But could a nation deserve that as a whole? Could happen. Not saying that's the case here, okay? I'm not making that connection. I'm just saying that this verse includes a lot of judgment, a lot of variety of judgment, and when people aren't getting it, they might have to get it the hardest way possible. We didn't have natural disasters during the Garden of Eden. We didn't. Man and animal got along, animal and animal wrecked it all. And sin continues to wreck it all. And later on, when we read more further in the book of Revelation, we'll run into many situations where everybody suffers because some sinned. I mean, that's true in the United States today, or even in your own families. Somebody can do something stupid and everybody suffers. It's not fair, but it's sin. Sin doesn't actually operate on a set of 10 commandments or anything like that. It's not a set of rules. Sin just causes chaos, and chaos breeds problems for everybody. So many times with my kids, I would have to explain to them, do you realize that every time you do something stupid, your mother and I suffer too? It's not an individual thing, okay? It's not like you just do something and you're the one who's suffering. We all do. Okay, and that's true for us too. If mom and dad make a mistake, do the kids suffer? Yeah. That's the way sin works. It's chaotic. It's not fair. It's just reality. And then finally, the wild beasts of the earth. Again, they were, man and beast were at peace in the garden, and now they're not. All the way from the stray cat that poops in your yard to something that tries to sting you to something that tries to eat you in the wild. Something that I tried to find a statistic on that was reliable. It was very hard to do. But at the very least, a conservative statistic on this is at least 100,000 deaths occur every year worldwide because of an animal attack. The most common is a bite that gives you rabies. 59,000 people die every year from rabies. Rabies is so serious that, in fact, it happened a few years ago in the jail. There was a bat in the jail, the old jail. Remember the old jail? The bat got in there and bit somebody. Inoculate everybody in the jail because rabies is so contagious. And they all had to have like a long series of shots, and these shots are painful, and they have, right in the stomach. Yeah.
Right in the stomach.
Yeah, and everybody in the jail had to get them. So you can imagine that they were angry because the bat was there. They were angry at the guy who got bit by the bat, and they were angry because they had to get all these shots and be miserable. Yeah, but it beats dying. And also rabies shots, I think it cost the county like $100,000. It's extraordinarily expensive for the rabies shot. Yeah, it's crazy. So the new jail is bat resistant by comparison. If you knew the old jail, you could have snuck a tank in there. So yeah, there were holes in the walls, no joke. Yeah, right. Yeah, Tyler might have a story or two.
Not
Not
for
you?
me personally.
Okay, that's good.
Family members.
Oh, okay. All right. Just people I know.
Yeah.
Okay, whatever. Yeah, good times. One time I was in there and they brought in an 18-year-old. I mean, he had committed the crime when I was in there. I was visiting with the guys, and he tried to put drugs through a hole in the wall, and the guys got it, and they caught him on camera, and they immediately went outside, arrested him, and brought him into the jail. 18 years old. And of course, he was a courier for a drug dealer. He himself wasn't the drug dealer. He was just suckered into it. So, yeah. Sad deal. He was scared out of his mind. Okay. So what are the lessons for the Christian today from the fourth horseman? Because in the end, all this has to make some kind of difference. First of all, we need to remember sin is deadly. James 1:15 again, when sin is fully grown, it gives birth to death. You probably all remember when George Floyd died in the news, the black man who was, depending on your perspective, I'm not trying to take sides, but he died, and some believe he was murdered by the police officer, some don't. I'm not going to get into that. But I can tell you this, he had been living a life of sin for a long time. He was high on fentanyl. He was trying to supposedly use a counterfeit bill. He had a record as long as your arm. I'm sorry to tell you this, but he would have died somehow anyway. And so, and when I've explained that to people, I've gotten some looks and I've had some people not so happy with me. But the point is, one way or another, sin's going to get you if you don't stop it. And it's deadly. And you don't hear that from a lot of churches nowadays. I think a lot of churches have just become self-help places. Like, so many sermons that people forward to me now are just like 10 ways to get richer, or 10 ways to help your kids. And I'm not saying that some of that doesn't have some value, but in the end, we need to preach sin, repentance, baptism.
It is honestly hard to find preaching out there that preaches actually the word.
Yeah.
Anymore. Most of them have turned into
Well, it's all about treating symptoms.
Yeah.
You know, it's not about the root cause. The root cause is sin. You don't get rid of sin, the rest is ultimately a waste of time. You might get some relief temporarily. Like Tylenol might give you relief, but it's not going to cure you.
It's a spiritual problem and people don't want to talk about it.
Right. Yeah. So that's my point. And so it doesn't matter if it's George Floyd or anybody else. If we have unrepentant sin in our life, it's going to get us. First it'll bite us, and then it'll kill us. It's the rabies of the spirit. And then finally, our secondary, sin has everyday worldwide consequences. So we need to realize that all around the world suffers because of sin. That's the root problem. God allows sin's consequences to play out for two reasons. Some people ask, well, why doesn't God just stop it? In fact, I was reading an article where a guy said that God is cruel because he just doesn't stop evil. Like, if you were all powerful, wouldn't you just stop evil? If you were God, wouldn't you just snap your fingers and stop evil? Well, there's two reasons why. Number one, it's to get the attention of the impenitent. Because here's the deal. If God snapped his fingers and stopped evil right now, you know what that's called? The final judgment. Time's up. I don't know about you, but I've got a handful of people in my life, among others, that I'd sure like to see come to Christ before that moment comes.
Yeah.
There's a consequence to asking God to end things. And then second of all, it's to bring justice for sin until final judgment and the eradication of sin. God is a just God. He's also a merciful God, which is why he sent his son and why he gives us a lot of blessings besides. But he could not be God if he was not just. And he could not be a good God if he was not merciful. So both aspects play in here. And as long as sin is being committed, justice for sin is required. So here's the end of it. The Christian must be vigilant to keep sin out. And here's some, we're going to get into some stuff that's a little bit deep here. But not just everyday Christians, but Christian leaders especially. James 3:1, not many of you should be teachers because you will be held to a double judgment. And then I list here a bunch of guys, and I kind of want to go over a few of these because I will tell you right now that every Christian, but especially every Christian leader or potential leader, so Tyler, this is useful to you and me, needs to be reminded that people have fell, and there's consequences both on this earth and for eternity when Christian leaders fail. And some famous examples, of course, probably the biggest one of modern history is the Catholic priest sex scandal. Untold thousands of abuse, hid, and evil men transferred between parishes, and it just goes on and on and on. Absolutely. And this is, I think, honestly, if people had any sense, this should have been the end of Catholicism and denominationalism. It really should have been. Because you won't have this problem if you don't have a structure that can transfer evil. Independent. I don't have enough of it. I have a connection to Clarence, but I don't have enough of a connection to Clarence to say, can you do me a favor and hide my pedophile? You know what I mean? There's actually, this is one of the really big advantages to being independent. It should have been the end of Catholicism and denominationalism when this happened.
Well, and I think celibacy is part of the root problem.
Oh, yeah. But Jim Bakker in 1988 was, his abuse and fraud and drug use and all the other things we're doing were so bad, he was charged criminally and sentenced to 45 years in prison. But because his crimes were considered non-violent, how abuse and all the other things he does considered, I don't know, our justice system is messed up. He got paroled just 5 years later. And now he's in southern Missouri scamming people into buying his, you know, when the rapture happens and, you know, all this dispensational Protestant garbage, you know, all the stuff that they talk about, you know, when the 1,000-year reign begins, you know, all the stuff that we're going to debunk later on, you need one of these condos. People are falling for it. The man is still rich. And the moment he got out of prison, he resumed his ministry.
He's got a new wife too, Tammy Faye died.
Yeah, yeah.
She what, died?
Yeah.
Tammy Faye?
After she divorced him.
Well, yeah, but I'm just saying.
Yeah, and she was no peach either. So
No.
good times, you know.
Yeah, she used to get on there and cry.
Oh yeah,
Money would just flow.
Yeah.
yeah. And you can get on YouTube and watch their old stuff and their new stuff. It's bizarre. So here's a good example. In fact, you know, I had a Catholic friend who was arguing with me about Catholicism. He says, you know, the fact the Catholic Church has been around for so long and is so big, that should convince you by itself that it's the one true church. And I said, the fact that it's been around so long and it's so big convinces me of the exact opposite. Okay? It's just a twisted, corporate, distant cousin of
It
Christian.
shows you how blind people are to the truth. You stare them right in the face and they can't see.
Doesn't matter. Yeah. Bill Gothard, this is a really recent one. You all remember the Duggars?
Yeah.
You know, that television show, 19 Kids and Counting and all that. He was the preacher that they listened to and based their whole lives on. And it came out a few years ago that he had molested and assaulted about 30 young women. So he's still in court and everything to this day about all that. Tony Alamo, now this is before my time, but back in the 1970s, he was a big deal in the Fundamentalist Baptist unit. And turns out he was a sex trafficker and a pedophile. So,
I don't remember that name.
okay. No. Okay. You'd have to be in the specific circle to remember
Well,
him.
he's a fallen away Baptist.
Fundamentalist Baptist, yeah, back in the day, yeah. Fred Phelps, now this one's much more recent. He's dead now, but he had assault and battery charges. He was considered to be so reprehensible that the entire United Kingdom banned him from even visiting. He's a hyper-Calvinist. Now, I don't like Calvinism, but hyper-Calvinism is a whole new level of evil. We'll talk about that some other time. He was excommunicated by his own church. That takes talent. Westboro Baptist before his death. And let me tell you something else about Fred Phelps a lot of people don't realize. Back in the 50s, he was one of the very first civil rights attorneys. He defended black people against a lot of unfair charges. At one point in time, he did good work. And then he fell into hyper-Calvinism and the doctrine of demons, I like to call it. And it turned him into the hateful, terrible person he became.
Well, you don't need to worry about salvation.
Yeah, and more than that, like God chose you, you can do whatever you want. Hyper-Calvinism takes Calvinism to its logical conclusion, which is God chose me, so I can abuse you if I want to. Yeah,
That's why it appeals to people. They do what they
People
Yeah.
should study the life of Calvin and see what kind of man he was.
Right.
To understand he had problems.
He betrayed a friend and burned him at the stake because it was inconvenient for him to visit at a certain time. Because he was basically the king of Geneva at one point, Switzerland. It's not the right term, but some kind of governor. And yeah, he was an evil man. Yep. And then some other examples. Everybody remembers Jimmy Swaggart. I remember that. Yeah. Robert Tilton, another one. Mark Driscoll is a very modern name. And Mark Driscoll is one that if you do not know better, you will fall for him. Because depending on what video you watch or what article you read, It sounds perfectly reasonable. But then he will go off the deep end into that there's many paths to God, and that you don't need to necessarily be faithful because the love of God is going to save everybody, and he can really,
Freelance.
yeah. In fact, really trying to nail down his theology is pretty much impossible. He goes for the wind. He'll go wherever it gets him a headline. I think that's the best way to think about Mark Driscoll. For example, he attended a conference not too long ago where he rightly called out a wrong that happened on stage, and he did so bravely. But I guarantee you he didn't do it for that reason. He took advantage of the headline. So be careful with Mark Driscoll. Josh Duggar, of course, that's the oldest child of the Duggar family. He's in prison for pedophilia, among other problems. Steve Lawson, this happened just a few weeks ago, and it came out just a day or two ago that the inappropriate relationship he had with a woman that caused him to be fired from his church was a 5-year-long affair with a 20-something-year-old. And the only reason why he confessed was because the father found out and threatened to expose him. So all it was damage control. And he's very well known. I mean, he's in the John MacArthur circle, the Legionnaire Ministry circle, R.C. Sproul circle. He was even on Bot Radio sometimes. So another really good reason not to base your faith on a man.
Yeah.
Matt Chandler is another example. Brian Houston. Joshua Harris. This one kind of hit close to home. Because when I was a brand new Christian, Joshua Harris released a book called I Kissed Dating Goodbye. Anybody remember that book? It was basically a book about stop sleeping around, stop messing around, date to marry. Take it seriously. It was a good book. And then about 4 or 5 years ago, he decided to abandon that philosophy, and then he left his faith, and now he's a useless person. So, very sad. Got a divorce, by the way, too. So, yeah, don't base your faith on men. And there's consequences for sin, and we can't ever forget that. That's why Paul says we must preach Christ crucified, because that's why Jesus died, was because of sin. If you stop preaching that, you're not preaching anymore. All right, friends, perfect timing early, so I don't have to rush out of here like I normally do. So that'd be nice. The whole day's been a rush. So, all right, we will resume next week with the 5th seal, which is martyrs. We'll talk about Christian persecution around the world. All right. Pray us out.
Dear God, thank you for this lovely evening. Thank you for all that you have done for us. Thank you for helping us to better understand your word and slowly guiding us through it, and help us to better understand and use it for nothing but.
Right. Thank you all.
You want to have a groundbreaking Saturday? You want to have a groundbreaking Sunday? We'll have